Welcome to this edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking from Washington, D.C. It is the afternoon of January 20th, 2017. It is now getting into the late afternoon hours of Inauguration Day, and we are now in the beginning of the Trump presidency. Obama has left town. Trump has taken over the White House. There are still ceremonies and toasts and luncheons going on at the U.S. Capitol, the Congress, under the dome, but there's also a parade. The inauguration parade is going to begin soon, and that will be viewed by the new president from the reviewing stand at the White House. So the ceremony is now in full swing. Then later this evening, we've got an estimated, 3+ inaugural balls. Now, we want to talk about what's going on. And I guess the starting point is that this inauguration is, on the whole, meager compared to previous exercises. And in particular, how about the turnout? How many people? The one thing noticeable is that the population of Washington, which is about half black, did not turn out at all for this event. And therefore, we have to essentially compare the Trump inauguration in terms of mass popular participation with previous ones. And that would be lines. It is estimated, and I've checked this on a number of sites on the internet, it's estimated that in 2009, for his first inaugural, Obama drew a crowd of about 1.8 million people. And that would be almost 2 million people, therefore. And that is apparently the biggest crowd that there has ever been in Washington, D.C. So that's the all-time record. Previous to that, interestingly enough, it was in the aftermath of the Kennedy assassination. This was Lyndon B. Johnson's first, it depends on how you count it, right? His first inauguration was in an airplane at Love Field in Dallas with the bloodstained Jackie Kennedy standing next to him. But in terms of a formal inauguration for LBJ, it was January 1965, after he defeated Goldwater in the 64 election. That's estimated to have been about 1.3 million, and that had been the highest turnout from 1965 until 2009. The third largest turnout is apparently Obama's second term, 4 years ago now, which was about 0.9 or 0.8 to 0.9 million. So 800,000 to 900,000. The beginning of Obama's second term. And then we have Bill Clinton's first term back in 1993. And this is about 800,000. Now, today we heard claims that this was going to be the the all-time championship, but instead today I have two estimates, and we'll refine this as the days go on. But it will be a kind of I think the reality is going to fall between these figures. The high figure is 400,000 for Trump, and that would bring him in at about half of the Bill Clinton figure of 1993. but I'm now looking at this. This was a preliminary one. The 400,000 was as it was still going on. And the figure that comes out now on Mediaite is 250,000, which would be a very modest turnout indeed. Now, you can remember in the Obama inauguration of last year, you had crowds that stretched from the Capitol all the way to the Washington Monument. And that meant, let's see, there's the ticketed area, and then I think Obama had 7 blocks, plus more crowd at the base of the Washington Monument, and then off to the south of the southeast of the Washington Monument. He still had more crowds. Now today it fell far short. And the other thing is, of course, that today the crowds were barely able to fill really the first 2 or 3 of these blocks compared to the 7 or 8 that Obama had. And, well, you can see that the attendance is significantly down. So the idea that this would be the biggest inauguration simply is not panning out. We'll refine our estimates as time goes on, right? This stuff is controversial. Now, the other question is, of those that were there today, how many were protesting and how many were supporting and celebrating? And this is hard to tell. So we're gonna bracket that. Just remember that of the 250,000 to 400,000 who might have come out today, how many of those were actually there to protest? And we're going to get the fine-grained readings now later on through social media, through other reports. There's also the question of the protesters appearing at events which are geographically separate and also separate perhaps in time from the inauguration. We are told, for example, that yesterday evening, I think this is over towards Columbus Circle, that is to say the southwest corner of Central Park, you had Michael Moore, you had Cher, you had others. That's supposed to be about 25,000 in New York who came out to protest. And we have to compare that with what's likely to happen here tomorrow, right? The Women's March. Now, let me hasten to point out for those who have really succumbed to the literal mindedness of our age, right? Just because it's called the Women's March doesn't mean that others can't go there, right? They're happy to have you. I guarantee you. It's not going to be segregated, right? They're not going to say if you're male, you have to turn back. No, no, this is not the case. So everybody can go, and I'm sure they want everybody to go. You can look them up on the internet, and you can see it's called Women March, and I'm mixing up the .org and the .com, but Women March or Women's March. So that's where you can look, right? And not only is this going to be here in Washington, D.C., but there will be regional and even local events. So if you want to make your voice heard, this is an opportunity to do it, right? What I'm hoping to see is an unprecedented politicization and activation of the American people as a result of the current predicament. Historically, people have come forward and become activists, so maybe that will occur again this time. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome to our second segment here on World Crisis Radio. It's the afternoon of Inauguration Day. Let me remind you, in these times, your best lifeline for solid analysis. No fake news, no hysteria, no nihilism, no Manichaeanism, no radical subjectivism, but the truth. And not just the truth, reality, but what to do about it, right? So that you can be guided in your political activism. And that's AmericanSystem.tv, as well as this current program. This program, of course, free once a week, goes up on Saturday afternoon usually. But there's also from Monday through Thursday another program, which is about the episodes each day, about an hour each, and that will keep you up to date. So we are told now, we were just checking Mediaite. Let's see if we can check the Washington Post here and see what they say. Remember, so far we're working with 400,000 high ball estimate and 250,000 low ball estimate. Now, there was some rain, and indeed the rain began to fall rather significantly at the moment that Trump began his speech. And this was obviously going to upset some of the, the religious-minded viewers. So at the end of this entire performance, Franklin Graham of the Billy Graham evangelical operation, he came forward and said, now, I think some of you may think that it's a bad sign if it starts to rain. But, of course, he says in Scripture, the coming of rain is a good thing. So it's a good thing. Now, let's see what if we can find any other of these crowd estimates. Right, having a little trouble getting down the page. It's clear that there's a lot of white space on these plastic flooring that they put in for people to stand on. So the more white space you see in the pictures, then the more of a problem that's going to be for the attendance. So the one thing we can measure, the ridership. How many riders do we have on the Washington, D.C. metro, right, the subway? And it looks like for Obama in 2009, that was up at about 500,000. Right? This is one of many ways you can get into town, because there are buses, there are cars, you can park and walk, you can do all sorts of things. And today with Trump, it looks like it's about 200,000. Today is about the same level as George W. Bush in the year 2005. So I'm looking to see if the Washington Post is willing to venture an estimate, but it looks like they're not gonna venture it. All right. So again, tomorrow there is this Women's March here in Washington, to be sure, but also elsewhere. And the estimates for that here tomorrow are in the neighborhood of 200,000. Now, to set the scene, George W. Bush was there, Jimmy Carter was there, Dick Cheney, sporting a cowboy hat, and Lynn Cheney was there. Of course, Obama, Michelle Obama, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, Senator Durbin, Paul Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi's husband, Bob Dole was among those present. The entire, or just about the entire, Supreme Court was also on hand. Now, I would like to review, before we get to the inaugural address, let me just talk for a second about the introductory speech for Trump, which came from Senator Schumer. And what he said was highly interesting, but at the same time, the way this was greeted was also highly interesting. For the past several days, we've been hearing on cable TV about how if you don't go to the inauguration, then somehow you're betraying the tradition of comity, bipartisanship, the peaceful transfer of power, civility, all these things. And therefore, I guess we had about probably 65 or perhaps more Democrats from the House of Representatives. Senators did not join this, at least as far as we know. Doesn't mean that every senator went. It just means the ones who made these declarations that they weren't going, and why. They were in the neighborhood of 60 to 70. But we were told that if you went along with that, right, if you decided to boycott it, then you were letting down civility and the wonderful tradition of good feelings and putting partisanship aside. All right. So just before Trump gave his speech, we have the appearance of Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, right? New York senator. And, of course, he's the minority leader in the Senate. So he gave a speech. Now, I just want to point out, he was heckled. Now, I say heckled. You could hear it. The networks did not cover it. In other words, I watched MSNBC and CNN. They did not cover this. And I don't know whether Fox did. But so far, it's hard to track down the details. But it looks to me like Schumer was subjected to a torrent of vile abuse as he got up there, right? So it's supposed to be this wonderful pageant of civic pride and the continuity of government and the peaceful transfer. And then the principal Democrat who gets to say something is immediately submerged in vile insults. How vile, I don't know. We're going to look into it and see how vile. But it just shows you all of those pompous, hypocritical Fox News commentators. Where are they? Now, Schumer's speech was clever, okay? Schumer is what he is, right? He's the senator from Wall Street. We know all that. But right now, this is an emergency, so gold is where you find it, right? And anybody showing any sign of life can be of interest. So he says that Schumer's line is that the inauguration celebration underlines the fact that the American people have faith in their institutions and their government. And you can hear the nihilists, the alt-right, right, the various libertarian retreads, they're all screaming. He says the confidence we have in our government comes from the American people. Another round of screaming. And above all, freedom of speech, of religion, Welcome back to Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C., and we're just reviewing the introductory speech. The guy who introduced the oath-taking and then speech of Trump turned out to be Schumer. And, of course, the Republicans keep saying, well, you know, it's got to be bipartisan, right? You're supposed to come. You're supposed to come to the ceremony. And if you don't come to the ceremony, you're letting down the wonderful tradition. But, no, that doesn't hold. So Schumer gets up there, and again, in a cleverly designed speech, I think just about every line had a sly dig against the orthodoxy of the incoming White House and their ideology, I think we can say. Schumer talked about faith in institutions and government, boo. Confidence coming from the people, right? Not from some charismatic leader, I guess. He made a big deal about freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, the First Amendment, important stuff. And then he read a letter that had been written in 1861 by a soldier in the Union Army, Sullivan Ballou of Rhode Island. And this is one of the famous Civil War letters. In other words, somebody or other made an anthology of letters home from Union soldiers during the Civil War. And what the guy says is, I'm going to go out and risk my life and perhaps sacrifice my life to preserve the government. Okay? And of course these guys don't want to hear that, right? So they don't like it. So Sullivan Ballou says, I I am looking forward to a triumph of our government, he says Sullivan Ballou, 1861. This is on the eve of Bull Run, first Manassas, okay? It's, I think, July 1861. We must maintain this government. And here you could hear chanting, right, that the alt-right was going nuts, right? The extremists. We have to maintain this government. They were yelling statist or whatever they were yelling. You have to believe in something bigger than yourself. And he says and then he gets killed, right? Within a week, the poor guy is dead. But he left this eternal testament to supporting the Union. And if you look all the way down the mall, you've got Abe Lincoln, right? The Daniel Chester French sculpture of Abraham Lincoln in this temple, as in the hearts of the people for whom he saved the Union. The memory of Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever. Okay? But the alt-right, right? The crowd right in Schumer's face, they didn't want to hear that. And then Schumer said something about, we value the contributions of immigrants, whether these families have been here for generations or whether they just arrived. And again, the alt-right, the lunatics, they go nuts. Now, this is food for thought. I'm afraid yesterday there were references coming from the incoming White House team about a movement and saluting a movement. Well, what is that movement? I'm afraid we heard some of the voice of this movement, right? And it was not pretty. And they obviously came to heckle. They were not gratified that Democrats were willing to show up and create this impression of bipartisanship, right? About which obviously we have significant doubts, but which you can make a case for it. So that was that. Then we had Pence getting the oath from Clarence Thomas, and apparently both of them, both Thomas and Justice Roberts, got it right this time. They didn't garble the oath, as had happened with Obama the first time around, I believe, so that he had to go and retake the oath indoors because Roberts had blown it. Roberts administered the oath to Trump. Now, in terms of the inaugural address, it was a short speech. It was about 20 minutes. I would say, first of all, this is a document of significant pessimism. I would say it is probably among the most pessimistic inaugural addresses ever delivered. Hard to judge, right? Hard to rank them, but certainly the pessimism. And it was, you can call it radical pessimism. You can call it a very dark view of the world. Now, if you compare this to somebody like Ronald Reagan, when he gave his inaugural, first one and indeed second, especially the first, he fully intended to leave the American people with little more than their eyes to cry with. That was Reagan. But Reagan disguised all this. He camouflaged it in his famous attitude of sunny optimism. This time there was no sugarcoating of optimism. This was, once again, pessimism. And there was no attempt. There was making no bones about it. And I would also point out this was not a speech designed to reach out to any of the groups that would be important for a successful presidential administration. That is to say, I did not hear any overtures or conciliatory gestures towards women, especially, or towards Latinos, Hispanics. We noticed that there are no Latinos or Hispanics in the current cabinet, and this breaks with a tradition that goes back, I think, even to to the Reagan years, right? Reagan had somebody with the Latino background. So I don't see any conciliatory gestures. There were all sorts of people that might have, been eager to hear something directed to them. And instead, it was some attempted, that guy Steve Schmidt, the guy who ran McCain's campaign, persistently misidentifies what we're hearing now as nationalism. It is not nationalism, just by virtue of what I said. That is, here in the United States, right, you have a highly diverse society, right? It's a melting pot, sure, but the melting pot takes a while, right? The melting is not instantaneous, right? The amalgam does not emerge, in the twinkling of an eye. So you've got all kinds of groups that are progressing, I hope, towards the creation of a, unified national population. But that's got to be helped along. In other words, you can't kid yourself that has already been totally accomplished. You've got to be careful about that at every phase. So I don't see nationalism. If you are insulting women, if you're, doing the same kind of number on Hispanics or on the disabled or on other groups, this cannot be nationalism, because you're ipso facto, you've already excluded the majority of the people. So what I heard with this was an attempt to reassure the hardcore Republican base, to try to reassure them that despite welcome back to Crisis Radio. Remember, keep up with us every day on the American System. It's AmericanSystem.tv, AmericanSystem.tv. So the reign started just as the new president, having been sworn in, began his speech. And his theme is it's the cultural populism of Washington bureaucrats, that it's time for the Washington bureaucrats to give up their power and transfer that power to the people. So there's an elite in Washington, so goes this analysis, and they need to be stripped of their power, and this has got to be given to the people. And then, of course, the dramatic situation, right, was that this, according to some, because this was an affront to all the denizens of Washington who were there while he was giving this speech, right, that they were, Limbaugh was impressed, right? They were sitting right behind him, and he went ahead and attacked them anyway. Trump signed some executive orders. We're told that these were ceremonial and logistical executive orders. As soon as he had the power to issue them, he began to issue them. But at this point, I can't find what was in them. And that is, the White House website doesn't tell you, and therefore people just don't know. Let me point out what the threat was. The thing that people were worried about, and I was worried too, was an executive order, for example, could be used to terminate the DACA, right, the deferred action on children of immigrants. In other words, the kids who were brought to the U.S., born overseas, therefore not U.S. citizens, brought in probably illegally by their parents, but then encouraged to come forward and register. And this is, 800,000 to 1 million? These are the dreamers. So these are immigrant children who needed to get on with their lives. And, of course, the U.S. national economy needs them if we are to escape the demographic crisis which is plaguing China, Japan, Russia, and Europe. If we are to exploit the greatest single advantage strategically that the United States possesses, that is to say, the willingness of people to come here, live here, work here, transfer their allegiance to the United States. That's the big ace in the hole. That's our trump card, if you will. And some people are determined to throw it away. This must not be allowed. So those are the dreamers. And of course, if you say, I'm going to send out a dragnet, I'm going to send out a deportation squad and start deporting all the dreamers, that will blow up the campuses. And any move in this direction, I think it's very clear, will tend to blow up the campuses this spring. And I'm thinking back, when was the last time? Well, it was the May 1970 student strike after Nixon invaded Cambodia, May 1967. I'm sorry, May 1970. What am I saying? May 1970, Nixon's invasion of Cambodia, leading then to the shootings at Kent State in Ohio. And that blew up every campus. And something like that could easily be in the offing. Now, notice, we're going to have more and more comparisons to Nixon, I fear, as time goes on. But, of course, Nixon was our last populist president, and I did a whole analysis on the American System Thursday program, and actually Wednesday and Thursday, about the obvious lessons of the Nixon administration. There might also be executive orders about the environment, right, rolling back certain things having to do with the EPA or with coal or other things. We're waiting to see. And another one would be an executive order to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv, Israel, to Jerusalem, Israel. The problem being that the part of Jerusalem where it would likely go is an occupied territory, and therefore, according to ironclad and very clear international law, you're not supposed to put your embassy on territory whose future is up in the air like that. But now let's get into some more of the details of this inaugural address. I mean, first of all, it's a dark world. Darkness covers the West. I was thinking this could have been written, it could have been given by a 19th century Russian Slavophile. These writers are not known, but they're worth knowing. Khomyakov, Kirievsky, Samarin, Danilevsky, I think also can qualify. Russian Slavophile writers who are obsessed with the decline, the rottenness, the bankruptcy of the Western world. So it's crime, gangs, drugs, disrepair, depletion, the Rust Belt, and so forth. So the idea is the antidote to that, according to Trump, is a government controlled by the people. The people have to become the rulers of the nation. Now, he goes and cites the forgotten man and the forgotten woman. Well, of course, the origin of the forgotten man is Franklin D. Roosevelt. This is a New Deal term, and it goes back to Roosevelt's speeches in 1932, and all during his presidency. So it means the people at the bottom of the economic ladder who are hurting. But of course, Roosevelt was there not to strip them of their health care, such as it was at that time, but to confer benefits, the Social Security Act, an old age pension, unemployment insurance, Wages and Hours Act, no child labor, minimum wage, unemployment insurance, all the rest of this. So we're going to be eagerly waiting to see whether any content is put in there. And again, this is supposedly the outcome of a movement. He says it's a movement the like of which has never been seen before. I'm not so sure. I think some historical parallels could be suggested, and they are not exactly edifying. The key idea, says Trump, is to serve the citizens. But then the panorama he paints is absolutely desolate, right? It's all bad. It's all pessimistic. The school system, he says, is flush with cash. There's plenty of money in the school system, but the outcome is lousy. I guess because of the teachers' union. Our military is defined as depleted. Of course, yeah, depleted up to a point. The sequestration demanded by the Republican austerity ghouls has led to some of that. But, and here I think this is the quote that's going to characterize this speech. He says, in the midst of all of this, we have to say, the American carnage stops now. The American carnage. Well, that's one way to look at it, but, I think the only thing we have to fear is fear itself is probably a better horse in a situation like this. Anyway, he promises that the American carnage will now stop. We have to have one heart, one home, and one glorious destiny. And the big problem is the nefarious foreigners, right? The foreigners are stripping us of our wealth. They're siphoning off our military strength, and we're told that our infrastructure is in disrepair and decay. Okay, but again, got to be something more than taxes. There's got to be some kind of a plan, and there's got to be finance. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. on the rainy, drizzly, cloudy afternoon of January 20th, 2017, Inauguration Day. Obama has departed. He had a brief get-together with his supporters, a lot of his White House staff and so forth, 1,800 people at Andrews Air Force Base. The helicopter had taken him there from the Capitol, not even the White House lawn, but the Capitol. So he then got into his airplane, and he's now headed for Palm Springs, California. So far, the possibly expected missile launch from North Korea in order to steal a few headlines, this has not occurred, and we don't know whether there has been an attempt, but it looks like that somehow didn't gel. Well, maybe that's better that way, right, to avoid hasty and ill-considered responses. Now, think the predicament of the Republicans. They are holding the bag. The presidency, the Senate, the House, shortly the Supreme Court, unless something radical happens, will be theirs. So they have power. But with that comes responsibility. And as we saw in this last election campaign, the one who got the most attention was the one who took the most flack. In other words, the attention with this kind of a population under these economic conditions and tensions, the more they see you, the less they like you. And that's going to be now working against the Republicans. The Republicans are now the establishment. Forget anti-establishment. They control all power. The Democrats can do little more than protest and delay, except where the filibuster can still be brought into play. But even that is now up in the air. So Trump says our infrastructure is in disrepair and decay. Yes, but it's going to take a plan for that. You can't just say, hey, you billionaires, come and get a tax credit by putting some money into any old infrastructure you want, right? Anything you choose to call infrastructure. There's got to be an integrated plan. There's got to be a New York to San Francisco maglev fast rail. There've got to be plans for the development of the inland waterways, canal building, electricity grids, and so forth. And you can't just say, hey, we'll have a few billion of tax credits to do that. So far, the vague references to infrastructure coming from the Republican White House, these are now just vague and really cannot be regarded as serious proposals, right? And this goes back to the middle of November. So the wealth of Washington has not been shared with the American people, says the new president. The U.S. is making others rich. The wealth of the American middle class has been sent abroad, and the jobs have been sent abroad. In other words, the usual theme of the runaway shop. But the runaway shop blamed somehow on politicians, not blamed on the Wall Street financiers, the Wall Street zombie bankers, the Wall Street hedge fund hyenas who actually did these things, but somehow the politicians. And this, I don't think the term Wall Street was uttered in this entire ceremony. Unfortunately, Schumer is not the guy to do that. But I didn't hear anything about Wall Street, least of all in this inaugural address, right? So look at how that has changed, right? In the, 5 or 6 years since Occupy, that emphasis has pretty much evaporated. So the idea that you had changed the national conversation, that fatuous term, the national conversation, that turns out to be not worth too much, right? As it goes from Honey Boo Boo to Britney Spears to, God knows, Lady Gaga, whoever it is. Now, we're going to have a new decree. It sounds like a new covenant. The new decree, the new vision is America First. America First, repeated twice, for American workers and American families, and they have to have protection. So the idea is, I think, protectionism. But protectionism means a permanent, stable, protective tariff. And a protective tariff today can be less than a protective tariff in the past, but certainly 10, 15%, 15% my preference. If you're for that, then you're not for free trade, then you're for protectionism, then you're a Hamiltonian. I don't see any sign of this. There is no commitment to a permanent, stable tariff as a fact of regulation, right? A regulated, orderly economy. So nobody can dump on you because they're going to get hit with this before anybody else needs to act. Then we have the pledge. I will never, ever let you down. I will never, ever let you down. And as a matter of technical politics, this is not wise. I'm thinking of Jimmy Carter standing in more or less the same place, who said, I will never lie to you. Now, these are utopian promises. I'll never disappoint you. I'll never let you down. I'll never lie to you. Don't make such pledges. Something also with Obama is relevant, right? Obama was hailed as the one, the Messiah. Nobody can deliver on that kind of an expectation. And therefore, it's better to assiduously avoid it and just say, look, the situation is difficult, but I promise you my very best effort, and I will spare no sacrifices to try to make this happen. We are promised now also in the utopian realm, we are going to win again. We're going to start winning again. We're going to get our jobs back, and we're going to get our borders back, and that's the perspective. Now, in terms of the infrastructure, there was a brief catalog of things like roads, bridges, tunnels, airports, and this went on for quite a few items, more than I could jot down. And that's fine, but the problem with all that is the financing. Which class is going to pay? Are working people going to pay through a gas tax? That would be the knee-jerk reaction of the House Republicans. Or is it going to be Wall Street bankers and financiers, the people who caused this problem? Not politicians, no. Wall Street bankers with their derivatives. Well, we'll be looking. We're also told that people will be gotten off welfare and put back to work. And all I can say is that there is no more welfare. Welfare has been gone for 20 years. Bill Clinton, who was standing there, took care of welfare. He abolished it. Aid to families with dependent children, which was a title of the Social Security Act of 1935. Somehow we could afford it in the Great Depression. But in our wonderful global-only world, we can't afford it. But it looks to me like Trump he's promising jobs, but the fate of even something like food stamps, right? Food stamps, the Republican Congress is likely to block grant that to the states. Other slogans: buy American and hire American. And if we buy American and hire American, we will shine. So old alliances will be refurbished and new alliances will be set up. the main idea is to eradicate and destroy radical Islamic terrorism. Now, the Republicans have been screaming that Obama failed to use these magic words, radical Islamic terrorism, but now the magic words have been spoken. So let's see if it has the magical effect. Will ISIS collapse tomorrow? Now that in a very solemn occasion of state, the U.S. president has said radical Islamic terrorism must go. An interesting quote, that if you let patriotism into your heart, there is no room for prejudice. Well, of course, that's what I argued before, right? You can't get into acrimony with women, Hispanics, the disabled, and so many other groups, and then pretend that you're representing the whole nation. These are integral parts of the nation. So, yes, but then practice what you preach. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. The gathering gloom here on Inauguration Day, late in the afternoon. Some rain coming down, some drizzle. The populist, the actual economic populist theme would have been, let's hold Wall Street accountable for their role in the banking crisis, derivatives crisis, and related crises, debt crises of 2007, 2008. Wall Street and the politicians beholden to them, fine. But Wall Street never mentioned, only politicians, and therefore cultural populism. And again, the cultural populism comes out in this idea that the foreigners are responsible for this stuff. America first. We'll talk about America first in a minute if we get a chance. So the United States is going to shine. This was the closest we got to the shining city on a hill, right? The quote from Governor Winthrop as he came across on the North Atlantic voyage in the early 1600s, that we'll be a shining city on the hill. The only thing is we will shine, and that's it. We will shine. Patriotism rules out prejudice and nativism. You can't be a nativist and a patriot at the same time, I say. So this leaves us then caught on the horns of that dilemma. He says a word or two about space, going back into space. I can't wait. Let's hear more about that. That we're going to cure dread diseases. I can't wait to hear about that. But, of course, neither of those is going to work unless you take away that sequester, which is crippling NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and also crippling the NIH. It's likely, though, that what he means is in many cases the private sector or the privatized sector, right? Maybe they're going to privatize NASA or privatize the NIH. This would be, I think, a disaster. We are going to experience a new national pride. Again, that has to be based on all the people. And the crescendo, right, what they call the peroration, right, in rhetorical studies. The peroration, right, the rousing conclusion is make America strong again, make America wealthy again, make America proud again, make America safe again, and yes, make America great again. So what did we not hear? Well, we were lucky, I think, that we didn't have attacks on the press. We didn't have attacks on Rosie O'Donnell or Meryl Streep. We didn't have attacks on such people, so that was merciful. But there was also, again, no gesture to women, no frank admission, again, of minority status, and that therefore that this is a minority, 3 million votes in the whole. Nothing like that. Nothing that would address the divisive campaign. Again, no overture to Latinos, no overture to the disabled. There was nothing about Hillary Clinton. I guess at least there was no commitment to try to investigate her and jail her. So I think what we're left with is a dark and narrow vision. And despite the references to the Forgotten Man, I don't know how that is going to work out in detail, right? Because the crucial thing is what happens in the details. And again, I say that ethnic nationalism in the United States context especially, but really in any modern state, ethnic nationalism or nativism is not nationalism. It is something to absolutely be avoided. There's also nothing about freedom. Again, he doesn't say anything about freedom of speech or the First Amendment or the Constitution. Did he ever mention it? I don't think he did. Let's check that one. The Constitution, somehow not at the center. Human rights, things that have usually gotten at least lip service, probably not included. One other, by the way, we were talking about these executive orders. I'm still trying to keep up with the executive orders to see what happens. One might be to start deporting the Dreamers. That will blow up the campuses. Another might be to start to change these environmental regulations. I think there might be some pushback on that. Another one is to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, which will blow up the Middle East. Right? New intifada, all kinds of bitterness and acrimony, and just not worth it. And above all, not worth it if you're not getting some concession. You know, like, well, you can think of some concessions, but I think maybe there are no concessions that can outweigh that. We're told that there will be more executive orders during the weekend, but we don't know what and we don't know when. And here we read in CNN, the timing of executive orders is likely to be fluid. One advisor told CNN that executive orders or White House announcements could be put out in order to change the conversation in case anti-Trump protests or other rumblings steal attention away from Trump. So if the women show up with 300,000, then that might be the occasion to try to get the spotlight back on the White House. I don't know what we're rolling out on Monday. It makes me a little nervous, says one official who has been through multiple transitions. Trump has promised to impose a moratorium on new agency regulations across the federal government. Now, that would probably be one of the least harmful things. Trump had, of course, promised if I get elected, many of those executive orders that he signed the first day, they're going to be unsigned. They're going to be rolled back. However, even there, some of this stuff is more difficult than it may seem. All right, now the other thing, the transfer of the nuclear codes, the transfer of the control of the U.S. nuclear deterrent forces, right? This means the triad, right? That means land-based missiles, ICBMs out in the Dakotas and similar places. It means submarine-launched ballistic missiles on Trident submarines and even more modern ones. And it means B-52 bombers and other B-1, B-2, and other bombers. Say a word on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now we're told by Politico and others, and through comments from Andrew Card being former White House Chief of Staff for Bush the Younger and a Bush supporter, that sometime between yesterday and today, Trump will have been given a briefing and he will have been issued two pieces of equipment. One is the football. The football is something that looks like a suitcase. You open it up and it's a transmitter. It can send out signals. And the other thing that he gets is a thing called the Biscuit, which is like a card that he can keep in his pocket. And between those two, you can send off the triad, right? You can send out the ICBMs, the submarine launched ballistic missiles, and indeed the manned bombers. And Card pointed to the fact that when George W. Bush got the briefing, it was a sobering moment. It defines the ultimate obligation that you might have. And of course, this had become an issue in the election campaign. Obama had said that the Republican candidate was not somebody who ought to get his hands on the football and the biscuit. But this is where we are now. So let's just look back, right? Once again, in terms of populist presidencies, we're on some of these issues, we're sort of left with Nixon as a populist, right? He was the guy who talked about the silent majority, the pointy-headed liberals, the nattering nabobs of negativism, the nervous Nellies, the effete snobs. This is him and his spokesperson, Spiro Agnew. We are told that during the Nixon administration, Nixon, of course, had one failing that Trump claims not to have, which is Nixon was a drunk. So for most of his political life, and I'm reading now from The Guardian of London, this is 2000, Richard Nixon, during most of his political life, he was prey to drink, prescription drugs, and fits of rage. And Anthony Summers, a well-known researcher, writer, they put together some of these events. And one time at Key Biscayne, Florida, this is, I think this might be the estate of Bebe Rebozo, a dubious character that Nixon spent time with. At Key Biscayne, Nixon lost his temper during a conversation about Cambodia. This could be spring 1970, what I referred to. He got so angry, the Secret Service guy says, they were half drunk, sitting around the pool drinking, and Nixon got on the phone and said, bomb the hell out of them, meaning, I think, North Vietnam. Quote, if the president had his way, Kissinger growled to aides on more than one occasion, quote, there would be a nuclear war every week. This may not have been an idle jest. The CIA's top Vietnam specialist, George Carver, reported that in 1969, when North Korea shot down a U.S. spy plane, quote, Nixon became incensed and ordered a tactical nuclear strike. The Joint Chiefs were alerted and asked to recommend targets, but Kissinger got on the phone to them, and they agreed not to do anything until Nixon had sobered up, slept it off into the morning. This allegation of flirting with nuclear weaponry is not the only one. It's not isolated. Nixon had been open to the use of tactical nuclear weapons in Vietnam as early as 1954 and had talked about it in 1968 as striking a blow, I'm quoting, a blow that would both end the war and win it. A Kissinger aide who served also in the White House said of the time he was on the phone listening when Nixon and Kissinger were talking, Nixon was drunk and said, Henry, we've got to nuke them. Now, that's one part of it. Now, the other one is the last days of Watergate, right? This is sort of par for the course for Nixon. But in terms of Watergate, James Rodney Schlesinger, and Rodney, he was the head of the CIA for 6 months, put in by Nixon, servitor of Nixon, and then he was put over in the Pentagon. But he also had, there were some limits, and I'm quoting here also from The Guardian. This is an article from, 2014 here. I'm sorry, this is the London Daily Telegraph, During Nixon's last days in the White House, at the height of the Watergate crisis, when some were doubting the president's mental stability, Schlesinger reportedly instructed the Joint Chiefs of Staff to check with him before carrying out any of Nixon's orders regarding nuclear weapons. He also drew up contingency plans for an emergency military deployment in the event that an impeached Nixon refused to step down. So that was Schlesinger, who died in 2014. One of the last things Schlesinger did was to do a nuclear review. Remember, after the famous Rogue V-52 of August, September 2007, right, one where I had a certain intelligence input into this stuff. After that, remember, they shut down the entire Air Force for one full day. Never happened before. The Secretary of the Air Force was fired. The military commander of the Air Force was fired. And they then did this review. I think it was a purge, right, that Schlesinger did. And that was, I guess, covered up and hushed up. But Schlesinger did all those things. That was one of his last services, I guess you can say. So to sum all this up, we have had a relative stabilization of politics and economics under Obama. And certainly economically, there's been a relative stabilization with some gains, but on the whole, a picture of stagnation, especially in wages. But that relative stabilization, or with heavily tinged with stagnation, if we want to call it that, this may now be departing, and a period of uncertainty and instability come in. Now, in terms of ideologies, let's just remind everybody of what we've been up to. I can't recapitulate everything about Nixon that we had on Wednesday and Thursday. Right? We spent a good hour between those two broadcasts talking about Nixon, his antinomianism. We did talk on this program, I think 2 weeks ago, about Nixon during the tilt crisis of December 1971, when Nixon wanted to favor Pakistan over India. The bureaucracy didn't, and they leaked, and they tried to sabotage his policy. That's what they do. We then did a thing about Nixon as a wrecker of international institutions, and in particular of the Bretton Woods system. And we have tried to argue that the wrecking of the Bretton Woods system, listen, subscribe and listen, August 15th, 1971, the currency risk, the floating rate system that was brought in by Nixon and Kissinger, led to the growth of risk, and it was risk that then fueled the demand for derivatives as a means of hedging against risk. So ultimately, the popularity of derivatives goes back to Nixon, Camp David, August 15th, 1971. And one way is derivatives. The other way is the snake in a tunnel, the European rate mechanism, and then the euro. So the euro, with all of its difficulties, artificial and real, also grows out of the wrecking of the Bretton Woods fixed parity narrow band system. So take a look at that. It's all on the American system. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Let's hurry into our 8th and last segment here on the late afternoon now of Inauguration Day, January 20th. The ideology that we are dealing with in many cases is nihilism. And we've been talking about nihilism. And I would like to supplement nihilism with a concomitant kind of bad ideology, and that is Manichaeanism or dualism. The idea that there are two radical forces, right? Absolute evil contending against absolute good. And I noticed this in the writing and speaking of many people who seem, when they want to deal with somebody that they don't like Hillary Clinton, they've got to somehow demonize her and imbue her with absolutely satanic qualities. And what we're constantly doing, therefore, is to reach into the sort of religious, superstitious bag to pull out terms to attack people. In other words, it's not enough to say they're corrupt, dishonest, or a public menace, or warmonger, or whatever it is. It's got to be that they're satanic and of course pedophiles and all the rest of the stuff. So this is a step away from rationality. But now let's look at what I think we can identify quickly here as what may turn out to be the ideology, or at least one of the ideological pillars of the new government that we've got here. And people will remember, I hope, that one of the polemics we have on this program is against radical subjectivism, right? We've been arguing for years that radical subjectivism is one of the typical mental distortions of late imperialism, which is where we are, and that it has its roots in Schopenhauer, right? The world as will and imagination, and in Nietzsche. And we've heard it, right? The neocons, remember that neocon bureaucrat who said, aha, you guys are the reality-based community, but we neocons, we followers of Carl Schmitt and Leo Strauss, we make our own reality, right? We don't wait. We're not fact-based. We're not reality-based. And we can rush ahead and create many new realities while you're still trying to deal with the old ones. Now, neoconism is maybe not the most evident, although there are such people here in the new regime, inevitably. But I would like to call your attention to this guy, Norman Vincent Peale. Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, very popular, very well known in the 1950s into the 1960s, and someone who published this famous book, The Power of Positive Thinking, 1952. 5 million copies translated into 15 languages. And the idea of this is essentially that by focusing on success meaning generally money, right? Business success. Hard to imagine other kinds, right? Business success, if you focus on it and if you strive for it and if you visualize it and you eat, drink, and sleep success and focus on success and absolutely implacably suppress all other feelings except success, then you'll be a success. Now again, this is not so far, this is hardly Christianity. It claims to be Christianity. I don't see how it is. This is really more like Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, but it's now in this typical banal American form. So this is a guy who set himself up. He became the pastor of Marble Collegiate Church, which I think is on Lower Fifth Avenue. Isn't that not too far from Washington Square, I think? And interestingly enough, when he set up as the pastor of the church, he set up a psychologist by the name of Smiley Blanton. How about Smiley? If you're going to be a positive thinker, you might as well have a name like Smiley. But Smiley was a psychologist, and they set up a psychology office next to the church. But again, it didn't work because despite all that positive thinking, they couldn't get along, and Blanton split away and would not endorse Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. He had a very popular radio program and so forth. Now, the critiques of this, right, are that that this is essentially hollow and actually, destructive. Here's what a number of them say. I recommend the Wikipedia article. The Wikipedia article is full of good quotes from people at that time in the mid-1950s that talk about this. Here's one of them that I'd like to get in if I can. So he says, everything has to be positive. Don't worry about anything negative. Just push it aside. It's not real. So here's a guy called R.C. Murphy. This is The Nation magazine, so leftists, of course. And he comes up with the following. He says, Dr. Norman Vincent Peale refuses to allow his followers to hear, speak, or see any evil. For him, real human suffering does not exist. There is no such thing as murderous rage, suicidal despair, cruelty, lust, greed, mass poverty, or illiteracy. All of these things Peel would dismiss as trivial mental processes which will evaporate if thoughts are simply turned into a more cheerful channel. This attitude is so unpleasant, right? Murphy doesn't like it, that it bears some attempt to explain its real meaning. It is clearly not a genuine denial of the existence of evil, but it is a horror. It's a capitulation to evil. A person turns his eyes away from human bestiality and the suffering it evokes only if he cannot stand to look at it. By doing so, he affirms the evil to be absolute, and he looks away only when he feels that nothing can be done about it. It's a kind of quietism, huh? You're giving up to evil. The belief in pure evil as an area of experience beyond the possibility of help or redemption, and this is Manichaeanism, right? So if you're a Manichaean, you think that there is pure evil, an area of experience beyond any hope of redemption or change or improvement. This is automatically a summons to action for the positive thinker. Evil means that which must be attacked. And now here's the part which might be of some interest. Between races, for example, this belief that there's absolute evil, which you got to turn away from because it's so horrible. Between races, for example, this belief leads to prejudice. In international relationships, it leads to war. As soon as a religious authority endorses our capacity for hatred, either by refusing to recognize unpleasantness in the style of Mr. Peel or in the more classical way of evoking Satan as somebody to hate, it lulls our struggles for growth to a standstill. Mr. Peel's book is not only inadequate, but for our needs, but even undertakes to drown the fragile inner voice, which is the spur to inner growth. Now, according to others, what Peel amounts to is a form of self-hypnosis, auto-suggestion. Self-hypnosis. So you're convincing yourself, you're